Members of our CAA staff who will introduce all of our panelists. And so from our CAA staff, we have Michelle Young, who is our community advocate at CAA, and Grace Lee, who is our policy advocate. And they'll take it from here.
Hi, so I think we just want to jump right in. We have a lot that we want to cover tonight. So before we get started, before we introduce the panelists, Michelle is just going to share a little bit more in detail about CAA's immigration work that we do here. Anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
咁我用廣東話講一講先，幫阿 Mabel 休息先。咁我叫楊敏芝 Michelle Young，係華出會嘅移民權益社區顧問嘅。咁其實我就想解釋，我哋喺華出會咧係用兩種方法去爭取移民權益嘅。其中一個咧就係用社區教育嘅。社區教育咧即係出嚟做 workshop 啊，關於翻譯服務條例啊，或者係移民有啲咩改革啊呢啲咁嘅嘢。另外嗰方面咧就係用啲同啲唔同種族嘅社區咧一齊合作，咁可以加強我哋個即係多元文化嘅社會。咁另外咧，我哋華出會咧係三藩市移民法律及教育網絡裏邊其中一份子嘅，所以我嘅工作咧就係轉介工作同埋出嚟做 workshop 嘅。咁最後咧，我哋都一路有用倡議嚟支持移民權益嘅法案咯。So let me just translate what I just said. My name is Michelle Young. I'm the community advocate of immigrant rights here at CAA. So I just explained in Chinese that at CAA we use two ways to advocate for immigrant rights. One of the ways is through community education. So that's workshops about language access laws, about changes in immigration policy. The other way that we use is we work with other immigrant communities or diverse communities to create a stronger, diverse society here in San Francisco. And then the other thing is, as a part of the San Francisco Immigrant Legal and Education Network, SFI, my job is really to do referral services for anybody who has immigration legal questions, and to go out and do workshops. And then lastly, we try to support immigration policies through various advocacy efforts.
Thanks, Michelle. So I think we'll just jump in to introduce our panelists very quickly. So first we have Henry Durr. He's a Senior Program Officer at the Four Freedoms Fund, which is a national funders collaborative in support of immigrant rights. As mentioned before, Henry helped lead the successful community-based campaign to secure this permanent City College campus here in Chinatown, North Beach. This campus serves over 6,500 adult immigrant students every semester. And also for 22 years, Henry was the executive director of CAA, working to promote the civil rights of Asian Americans and other racial minorities. So please welcome Henry Durr. And next to Henry, we have Cecillia Wang. She is the director of the ACLU Immigrant Rights Project. Her practice focuses on civil rights issues arising from immigration enforcement, including constitutional challenges to state anti-immigrant laws such as Arizona's Proposition 100. Cecillia was awarded the Joe Murazumi Award for Exceptional Legal Advocacy by the Asian American Bar Association. We're also lucky to have Cecillia on our board here at CAA, and she is also a board member of the Asian Law Caucus. Thank you, Cecillia.
And the next up we have Francisco Ugarte, who is a senior immigration attorney at Dolores Street Community Services, where he represents low-income San Francisco residents in deportation cases with a particular focus on protecting the constitutional rights of immigrants. As part of the San Francisco Immigrant Legal and Education Network, he provides frontline and immediate legal defense to immigrants arrested during federal immigration raids. CAA honored Francisco for his work at our 2011 Celebration of Justice. Thank you, Francisco. And last but not least, we have Bill Ong Hing, who is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco and professor emeritus at UC Davis School of Law. He has written several books on immigration, including To Be an American, Cultural Pluralism and the Rhetoric of Assimilation, which won Outstanding Academic Book of 1997 by the Librarian's Journal Choice. He writes about immigration issues for the Huffington Post, Professor Hing is the founder of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco and continues to volunteer as general counsel. He is also on the San Francisco Immigrant Rights Commission. So welcome, Professor Hing.
Okay, so I think we'll just jump into our questions. We've formatted our discussion tonight to be Q&A, sort of talk show style. So we'll just jump in, and then just a reminder to the panelists that we do have simultaneous translation happening, so just be sure to speak very clearly and slowly. So our first question, we'd like to start with Henry, and then we also would ask the others to jump in with their answers as well. But the first question is simply, why do we need immigration reform? Why would we call the immigration system broken in its current state? So if Henry, you'd like to start?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again for... Okay, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Immigration reform has been needed for many years now. We have over 11 million undocumented persons in this country, and contrary to the popular belief that they all crawled underneath the border fence along the U.S.-Mexico border, many undocumented persons actually are family members who can no longer wait for their visa to be approved, to be reunited with their family members here in the United States. So of the 11 million, a very high percentage actually came over here on a tourist visa or some other kind of visa and then decided to stay here because they need to be with their families. It's also been well documented that persons waiting to be reunited with their family members are, especially immigrants from Asia, indeed even Mexico and other countries in the Americas, they have well over 10, 15-year waits to have their visa to be approved. So it's a system that is really not working, and also there's the matter of guest workers who are brought into this country, and they're brought here, they're paid low wages, they're abused, and their presence is tied to the employer that is employing them, and it's ripe with a lot of abuses and whatnot. So our policymakers have been unable in 2006, again in 2007, to come to agreement on an immigration bill. And in 2010, no viable bill was even introduced to be voted. So it's really been that bad. And the only reason why we're having an immigration reform debate is because of the election results and the turnout of largely Latino voters who have said, we're sick of the anti-hate rhetoric, the anti-Latino rhetoric, and other minority groups, they hear this kind of message and say, but for the grace of God, if they're not talking about Latinos, they would be targeting me too. So this is the time now to have a resolution to this set of issues, because people are sick and tired of solutions not being acted on by the Congress and by the President.
Thanks, Henry. I invite any of the other panelists to comment as well.
Well, let's see. Why do we need immigration reform? So for the last 5 years, I've been working as a deportation defense attorney with the San Francisco Immigrant Legal and Education Network. Just today, I was meeting with a 10-year-old U.S. citizen child who had lost his father to deportation. And I had to explain to him that because he had committed a prior crime, a felony, that it was impossible for me to petition for him to come back. And the child started crying, and he had a social worker with him. And if you look at the statistics, in 2010, there were around 400,000 people deported. For the first 5 months of 2010, 46,000 deportees reported having U.S. citizen children. 10% of children in California have at least one undocumented parent. This is the time for immigration reform. We literally are building, the more deportations we see, the more undocumented people we see. We have a two-tiered system of citizenship in this country. And so I think there is an absolute imperative. The other issue on immigration reform, there's so many reasons why the system is broken. But with regard to employment issues, it's illegal for an employer to hire an undocumented person, yet 11 million undocumented people work in this country. And for those people, they work in very, very difficult jobs and are oftentimes exploited. And it is very difficult for undocumented people to seek a remedy, seek justice after they've been exploited on the job. And that has led to a reduction in wages and earned income for working class people in the United States. And so immigration reform is an imperative from an economic perspective to raise wages for everyone and to move forward.
Go for it, Cecillia.
Well, I think that Henry's described the reasons why we need one piece of immigration reform, which is a way for 11 million people who are already in the country to get their papers, and also to find a way for future people to come into the United States. And Francisco has already described some of the ways in which our immigration system is broken. And so I guess I would just echo what they say and tie those two things together and say that we need an immigration system that has a line, an effective line for people to get into, right? We always hear people say, why don't these people get in line to immigrate into the United States the legal way? Well, the fact is, as Henry mentioned, if you're from Mexico and you have a U.S. citizen relative who petitioned for you to come to the United States illegally, legally, the United States State Department is now getting to people who applied in 1993. That's the so-called line. So we need to fix that and have a real way for people to come into the United States legally. And the second thing we need to do is to fix the many ways in which we broke our own immigration system back in 1996. Francisco talked about some of the ways in which, back in 1996, our Congress decided that it would take away the power of immigration judges in this country to decide whether someone deserves to stay here, either because they have U.S. citizen family members, or because when you really look at the circumstances of their case, they don't deserve to be expelled from the country that's become their home. And we also, as a country, passed laws in 1996 that require immigration judges to lock up people who are fighting their deportation cases while they're fighting those cases for 2, 3, 4, sometimes even longer, more years. So those, I would just echo what Henry and Francisco said. We need to fix both aspects of our immigration system.
Yeah, I can't disagree, obviously, with anything that the previous speakers have said, but to be honest with you, when somebody asks us why should we be interested in immigration reform, you only have to think of your own family. And while most of you here probably had one happy experience with the Immigration Service, and that's the experience that allowed you to be here, most of you can probably talk about a bad experience in your family quite easily. And so, especially when you're in Chinatown, Chinatown is here because of immigration policy. And the reason why Chinatown is here is because there's only, we're living in a part of the country where we're misled by the number of Asians that we see when we walk out on the street, because truthfully, around the country, the population of the United States is 5 or 6% Asian American. And if it wasn't for the Asian exclusion laws, the population of the United States would probably be about 40% Asian American, if not more. And so when you talk about immigration policy, it's not just historical. The fact that many of our relatives, I had an aunt who died waiting on the waiting list to come to the United States. I had an uncle who was deported from the United States. And so deportation and family reunification are pillars. And the last point that Cecillia made really is a good one, the waiting list. We actually have a very, very old-fashioned immigration system. It doesn't reflect society today. It doesn't reflect how mobile the universe is, the globe is. It doesn't reflect the fact that many people, rich and poor, actually want to come and go across borders. But United States immigration policy doesn't permit that. And so that old-fashioned way of looking at immigration and how people move around the world is something that we ought to fight to have rehabilitated and in the process understand that this is a civil rights issue.
Thank you. So I think all four panelists kind of touched on a lot of issues that will come up in reform. And so just to recap, I heard the issue of family reunification, both because of increased enforcement with deportations, but also due to the visa backlog. There are employment and workers' rights issues that are happening, and the economic perspective, and also just, I think, the overall rhetoric and understanding of our immigration system, the reasons that we need an effective line, and a few of you alluded to some administrative fix that could happen within the immigration courts and the detention centers. So those are a lot of categories that we want to touch broadly on throughout the course of this discussion. And we didn't want to focus too much on the current state of reform because we know that the different iterations coming out of the White House and the Senate may change a lot over the next couple of months. But we were hoping maybe if Bill, you could just describe, in your opinion, what is the current status and the prospect of reform, and then we'll move into these specific issues.
So as all of you know, a week ago, a group of senators, 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, made their joint proposal on immigration reform, and roughly speaking, it's about legalization for undocumented immigrants. It's putting DREAM Act students, the college students that grew up here, putting them a little bit ahead of their parents. It's about clearing the backlogs for families. That's good. And it includes a number of other proposals that are all about enforcement. And in fact, nothing, it appears, can happen without more money for the border, more money for interior enforcement. The senators, my goodness, they even proposed expanding these, what are called drone monitoring along the border that we associate with the wars that are going on in the Middle East. And so it's very much about enforcement. And the president's proposal came the next day, last Tuesday, his outline. And it was very, very similar with a couple important exceptions. For example, the recognition of same-sex marriages for the ability to immigrate. Both of the proposals also had extra visas for high-tech, or what they call STEM, which are the science, technology, engineering, and math majors. They're using the term, as soon as they graduate with a degree in one of those fields, we'll staple a green card to those visas, and also job creating visas. So I'll try to be short. On February 12th, apparently the House is also going to come out with a proposal, a bipartisan proposal. We'll see whether or not they can hammer one out. The good news is that Zoe Lofgren, who's a member of Congress from San Jose, is on a quote-unquote secret committee that's bipartisan. One of the other members actually is Paul Ryan, the vice presidential nominee in the election, who's also on that secret committee. At any rate, so I think that their proposal will be very similar. But what's disappointing when we hear the rhetoric, listen, I'm not opposed to STEM visas, the science, technology, math visas. And I'm not opposed to the president's beautiful remarks about how this person started that company and this person started this other company and how they contributed in that fact. But I'm very disappointed in the non-recognition of how the average everyday immigrant worker also builds this country, and how that person's feeding their family, and how that person is working hard and keeping their nose to the grindstone. That's what we can't forget, that yeah, this is a nation of immigrants, but it's not just the ones who started Google. It's the people that are sweeping, I guess, the floors in this building and that are serving the food at the restaurant across the street.
Thanks, Bill. So that actually, you're pointing to something that we did want to ask you about. It seems like from the White House and the Senate, the proposals are really treating immigrants as just labor, as part of the workforce. They're not thinking about them as immigrants who are part of families and communities. So we did just want to stay on this, on the employment stuff. So for anyone on the panel, if you'd like to answer, there is a heavy emphasis on agricultural workers given the industries here in the U.S. And then also, like you said, the STEM, the high-skilled professional workers. So what about the people left in the middle? How is that going to impact them? Are there any groups that are on the front line advocating for them to be included in reform?
Well, I think the many advocacy groups across the country that are based out of DC, and indeed undocumented students, United We Dream Network, and also the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. Many of these networks have not only talked about the legalization of 11 million undocumented persons, but they have been very clear that the rights of immigrant workers need to be respected, especially those that might be part of some type of future flow guest workers. Because if you don't provide guest workers the same kind of rights that are, allegedly given to American-based workers, then we will have a two-tiered system and a lot of abuse, and that would not be very good. And we should not, even though the Gang of Eight last week talked about a special treatment for undocumented students and farm workers, we cannot assume that it's all going to be hunky-dory for these two sets of populations. Farm Worker Justice and the United Farm Worker Union, they are very, very concerned about legislators who are in favor of special treatment of farm workers, but also not respecting minimum wage for these workers that might get this kind of status. It is an ongoing sort of battle that needs to be monitored and carefully watched. I think there's now general recognition that no one, and with all due respect to farm work, no one of our families, I don't care if you're Asian, black, brown, or white, or some kind of ethnic culture, no one in this day and age is raising their children to be farm workers. There's this general recognition that we need immigrant workers to be farm workers. So even the anti-immigrants, they don't like immigrants, but they know we need them. But in recognizing that they're needed, they see immigrant workers as a commodity, just like the days of slavery in the Deep South, before slavery was abolished. These are commodities, and the question is how can they be exploited and be paid the lowest wage possible. So there's still a lot of work to be done in these legislative proposals that at least seem a step forward, but there needs to be a lot of work to make sure that the rights of workers are protected.
I think, you know, in terms of workers left out in the express dialogue being talked about in these particular programs, you look at domestic workers, no one wants to deport domestic workers. You look at service workers in the service sector, and you look at construction workers, and you see all of these classifications of workers not being addressed. And I also think, you know, with regard to those constituencies, there's some really interesting alliances forming. The AFL-CIO historically has been kind of lukewarm on immigration reform, but they've been quite strong recently. There's an alliance being built between the AFL-CIO and the Domestic Worker Campaign. The AFL-CIO actually has a group working with non-union worker centers, and they're working on looking at reform packages. I read a newspaper article that AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce are meeting to see if they can come to an agreement around issues like guest worker programs. Guest worker programs were a key component in the 2006-2007 immigration reform bill initiated by the Bush administration. And those programs, the AFL-CIO ended up strongly opposing those programs because they provided serious restrictions on workers to be able to challenge their conditions of work. And I think that if a guest worker program would be initiated in this round, similar to the one in 2006, I think there would be serious problems in moving something forward. But hopefully there will be an alliance of these different partners to move something forward in a slightly stronger way, so that, you know, if you look at future flow around immigrant workers, there are systems in place so workers can come here to work, immigrants can come to work.
You know, I just want to emphasize, though, what you alluded to, Grace, which is that I think all of the discussion, I think realistically talks about immigration in terms of workers, right? And that we value immigrants for their labor. But I think the reality is that we all know from being immigrants ourselves or in immigrant families that even if you come here primarily to earn a better living for your family, once you're here, you're so much more than the value of your labor. And that's even setting aside the point that not everybody wants to immigrate to the United States in order to make a living. There are people who are seeking asylum. There are people like my parents who came here for graduate school and decided this was a place they wanted to raise me and you know, throw in with this more, you know, theoretical concept of being American and all that that means beyond economic opportunities. Other than that, I think, you know, as Henry said, the Dreamers have gotten preferred billing, I guess, in the Gang of Eight proposal and the White House proposal. But I think we really need to keep our eye on the Dreamers themselves, because they have said they don't want their parents left behind. And they have really taken the lead so far before the election, right? What was the big progress that was made in the field of immigration, the deferred action policy that the Secretary of Homeland Security announced for Dreamers. So I would keep an eye on what the Dreamers do. The one group that I think really needs some attention that the ACLU is working on, and that many other groups that Henry funds are working on, is keep your eye on who gets left out of the legalization piece. Because there's no doubt that the proposals will be to exclude people with criminal convictions, and very broadly defined. So there's been discussion about excluding anyone who has a felony criminal conviction. And my answer to that proposal is take a look at who has felony criminal convictions these days among immigrants. In the state of Arizona, they are criminally prosecuting and convicting people for smuggling themselves under an Arizona state law. They're prosecuting people for working under a fake Social Security number under a felony Arizona state law. And so when our allies and supposed champions in Congress come to us and say, we need to restrict eligibility for legalization, how about starting with people with felony convictions? I say, do you want an immigration reform bill that puts it in the hands of Arizona prosecutors who is eligible to get legal status in this country. And so I think we all need to keep our eye on that issue.
So I mean, you all have touched, actually we have like a really long list of questions that we really wanted to ask, but we tried to narrow them down. But this works out because you've actually answered a lot of the questions. So it's good. I kind of wanted to jump back, kind of following on your train of thought, Cecillia, about Dreamers. So in the case of Dreamers, you know, for the audience, Dreamers are young undocumented immigrants who were brought here as children. So you know, we've heard a lot about them. They've had a lot of victories in the recent years. In particular, the California DREAM Act, and what Cecillia mentioned, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So either Cecillia or Francisco, if you can answer, what obstacles are they likely to continue to face, you know, even after reform happens?
For DREAM Act students. So one of the issues that keeps coming up in the current dialogue around immigration reform is the question of citizenship. And one of the proposals being circulated was that individuals would have to wait, would become probationary individuals in the country and have to wait for becoming a citizen after everybody who's already filed for a visa petition becomes a green card holder. And as we've heard earlier, some of those waits could be up to 23 years. And for DREAM Act students who now currently have work authorization, a lot of Dreamers want to become citizens. They want to fully participate in society, and they're not allowed to. Even though they have deferred action, they can work, but they can't vote. And I think a key issue in this dialogue is whether people will become eligible for citizenship earlier than the 23, 24-year wait line, that waiting period that we see now.
I'd like to add, in the Deferred Action Program for eligible undocumented students who get deferred from being deported and a work permit for 2 years and a Social Security card, there's an estimated 1.8 million undocumented students who are eligible for the Deferred Action Program, but to date, a little under 400,000 have applied. So our estimation is those who have applied to date from August 15th until present date are typically Dreamers who have easily met the eligibility in a fairly straightforward way. But for an undocumented student who did not finish high school and dropped out for any number of reasons, or is not in a GED program, or as Cecillia mentioned, if a Dreamer has some kind of criminal conviction, certainly felony, it's going to be a big problem. But if they have misdemeanors, then the question is how significant the misdemeanor may be. So there's still a large number of undocumented students who have not applied for the Deferred Action Program. And it's somewhat troubling, and there needs to be more outreach into the community to see why more are not applying. And if the rhetoric and the proposals that are being mentioned from the president to the Gang of Eight, and possibly a bipartisan committee coming out of the House of Representatives, where they're going to be very harsh about folks not being criminals, you know, paying back taxes, knowing English. Well, it's going to be a significant challenge for undocumented immigrants to be able to demonstrate that they have had the opportunity to learn English. So let's say that we have a legalization program. Well, will we have enough ESL classes, and ESL classes that are provided at a time when immigrant workers can attend and access those classes? We're experiencing tremendous cuts, City College, you know, we're going through big problems. So it is a tremendous problem. And if we think we have problems here in the city, it's even worse in rural areas where there's not that level of sensitivity towards immigrant students. And the other thing that I think we need to watch out for in this immigration debate about enforcement is we already know today that the budgets for immigration custom enforcement and the Custom Border Patrol, those two main entities for immigration enforcement, the budgets for those two agencies, the combined budget, is larger than the combined budgets of all other federal agencies in the United States government, from DEA, FBI, I don't know, all the enforcement agency. We are spending big bucks for immigration enforcement. And the private prison industry, they love these anti-immigrant laws because the 32,000 immigrants that are in detention every night of every day in the year, 1/2 of them are housed in private for-profit prisons. Money is being made by corporate interests in detaining and deporting immigrants. So it's very troubling to see what will it take to qualify for legalization. I mean, it's easy to say, we'll give legalization to 11 million people, but what are going to be the requirements, I think, remains an unresolved question.
Yeah, let me comment on the Dreamers and also the need for very generous legalization. In addition to what Francisco said of asking those, if there's a legalization program, asking those individuals to wait, go to the back of the line, there's also a condition in both the White House and the Senate proposal, and will be in the House proposal too, which is that legalized individuals would not be able to qualify for permanent residence until the border is secure. And the two different proposals that are out right now have different metrics, different standards for determining what that means. Obama has a more simple checklist than the House does, and that's going to be a problem if they're going to wait for the border to quote-unquote be secure. And so our allies are arguing, oh, it already is secure, look at the numbers have gone down and the fences are there and all that kind of stuff. But I'll be honest with you, and everybody in this room knows this, that if there's another economic decline or imbalance that's greater between the United States and Mexico and any other country for that matter, people will come here no matter what you do at the border. And so the solution is not militarizing the border. The solution is some other more broad-based approach to the flow of immigrants, but I'm repeating myself. On the Dreamers, and Francisco knows more about the DACA, those who are applying for the deferred action, than anyone on this podium, I'm sure. But, you know, it's funny, when I do talk to Dreamers a lot, and I agree with the implication of what Henry is saying, that most Dreamers probably are electing, those who are aware of the requirements, they probably are electing to apply for this deferred action or DACA program. But I've actually come across a number of Dreamers that challenge me and ask me, can you guarantee that I'm not going to get deported? No one can guarantee that they're not going to be. No one can guarantee that in 4 years, when there's a Republican president that's elected, that Republican president will not just cancel the program if immigration reform has not happened, but the confidentiality, there's not guaranteed confidentiality in those applications. And many of the Dreamers who are hesitant because of their parents, because they're afraid that the information will lead to their parents. And we just saw that, whatever it was, 2 or 3 weeks ago, when a Dream activist had her parents were arrested. And, you know, yeah, they got them out, but because they were willing to go to the press, and she was very savvy about the press. But I've represented Dreamers and parents who do not want to go to the media because they're afraid. They're afraid of losing their jobs because one parent is not in proceedings and another parent is. And they're afraid if they go to the media that their employer is going to figure it out. So not everybody is willing to be in front of a television camera to argue their case. That's a lot of people. Nobody knows exactly how many, but in my opinion, that's why you're not seeing all of the dreamers apply. That's one reason.
Thanks, Bill. That actually transitions well into something that we wanted to talk about. I think, as you've seen, I think some of our partners from the Asian Law Caucus are here, and they recently launched their Our Families Matter campaign, which is exactly arising from the situation. Dreamers, you have folks who are applying for deferred action status, and yet their families are subject to removal. And so, although they've been granted 2-year temporary relief, for them, they're still at risk of being separated from their families are being torn apart. So we did want to talk a little bit about that because family reunification, as we mentioned before, has been happening in 2 different ways. One, families being separated due to deportation, but then we also have the issue that many of you alluded to in terms of the visa backlogs. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time because particularly for the API community, the statistics are coming out. The top 5 countries with the longest backlogs, 4 of those 5 are Asian countries, the Philippines, India, Vietnam, and China. So this is really an issue that's hitting the API immigrant community. So I'm just wondering if any of the panelists would like to talk more about that. I think even just from a technical standpoint, for some people new to this issue, why are the backlogs so long?
Wow. Yeah. So where can we begin? The backlogs are long in part because of the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the other Asian Exclusion Acts, but I won't give you that long history. There's only so many visas per country that are permitted for family immigration, and there are some relatives that are outside of the numerical limitations, the parents and spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens that don't have to go against a quota, but all the other relatives, the adult children of U.S. citizens, the siblings, the relatives of lawful permanent residents, the spouses and the children, the married sons and daughters of U.S. They all go into the preference system, and because certain countries like Mexico, the Philippines, certain Chinese countries for a while, South Korea for a while, India, well, I guess still India, the Dominican Republic, because the demand is greater than the number of visas available per country. Every year, the backlog gets longer and longer and longer in certain categories, and so it's growing and growing, and the bad part of that, and this community has fought this battle since the 1980s. The bad part of that is some anti-immigrant people argue, well, if the backlogs are so long, those categories are useless. Why not repeal them? And so, this community, and it goes back to when I worked up the street at what used to be called SNFLF. When the sibling category was challenged in the 1980s, we took to the streets actually, and we defeated that 4 times since then. And there's going to be another attack. It's not in these proposals, but it's very clear that there will be some conservative members of Congress that will again propose that we eliminate family categories, especially the sibling category. But one of the reasons why many of us decided to finally oppose the 2007 bill was because the proposal was to eliminate all the family categories, not just the sibling one, all the family categories. And in place, put in an elitist point system for people who could speak English and had advanced degrees. And so if they're going to go there again, I'm not going with them, okay? And so we just got to pray that doesn't happen again. But that's why the backlogs are so long, because the demand is greater than the number of visas.
During that 2007 debate, when they looked at the family visa backlog, they did come up with a plan. I mean, was not incorporated into that particular bill that was considered. There was a scheme to address the family backlogs, and that the family backlogs could be wiped out over a 7-year period. So it is doable if they want to do it. But as Bill stated, there was a lot of hate that spewed out at that particular time and continues to this current day, because we hear these terms, you know, it's chain migration, anchor babies, so on and so forth, as if family members, if they're brought here, don't contribute anything to American society. But we know that it is totally possible to eradicate the family visa backlogs. And in fact, if you eradicate the family visa backlogs, you begin to really address the status of millions of undocumented immigrants, part of the 11 million.
Yeah, well, you know, there were two versions of that proposal, Henry. One proposal was a bargain. If we clear the backlogs for you, will you accept no more family immigration? Okay. And then the other proposal that was countered, and actually Karen Arsaki helped develop this counter proposal, was take out the Mexican immigration numbers and give Mexico unlimited numbers. Just, there are friends and if they did that, that's where the 7 years came in. If Mexico was actually eliminated from the family immigration quotas and just Mexicans could immigrate, and you know, you don't let in people with certain exclusion grounds, it would have cleared all the backlogs in 7 years. That's where the 7 years came from.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a lot of different things. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that to clear. I'm just making the point that it is doable, but you don't necessarily have to hurt, you know, other folks. It's a question of magnanimity, again, because so many of the undocumented are in fact family members, because it's a lot of undocumented immigrants live in mixed status families. Their family members are legal, they're citizens, or they're LPRs. So, and that's what's so frustrating about our current immigration system, in that it does not take into consideration how families have evolved and how they're constructed.
Let me just add one more thing on deportation and family unification. So there are preference categories, but immediate relatives don't have a weight, and so spouses can petition. You can petition your parent, and the parent can petition their child. However, children can't petition for their parents until they're 21 years old. And if somebody has been in the country for longer than 1 year in unauthorized status and then leaves the country, there's an automatic 10-year bar that bars that person from ever coming back to the country. Now, you can petition for a waiver in a consular office to waive the 10-year bar, but your U.S. citizen child is not a qualifying relative that can trigger a waiver. You have to have a U.S. citizen spouse or parent. And so our laws with regard to the bar, the 10-year bar, penalize U.S. citizen children and prevent families from unifying even immediate family members. So I think that's something that has to be addressed.
So, I mean, talking along of family reunification, we also want to talk a little bit, you know, what's the impact right now of the two proposals on binational same-sex couples? You know, there's, in President Obama's proposal, you know, there was the clause that says it will include same-sex couples. But in, you know, anybody can answer this, you know, what do you think is the struggle, really, to get that right for same-sex couples? And also, how can reform address it?
Well, I mean, right now in the immigrant rights movement, there are many allies and advocates for legalization, for family visas, backlog eradication, for a sensible guest worker program that protects worker rights. And those allies range from grassroots groups to labor, to chamber, to people in the faith community, to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, so on and so forth. On the matter of binational couples and how they will be treated, is going to be one of those issues that allies in the movement do not agree on within the immigrant rights field. And there's already a very early sign from certain members of the faith community that they're not going to go with or support a provision that that includes binational couples. And we can expect certain allies like the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to have serious concerns about this particular issue because of their stance on marriage equality. So it's one of these very difficult issues that folks in the immigrant rights community will have to sort out. Now, I'm not sure how it will be sorted out because there are different political strategies. There are some who will argue, let's go with the Gang of 8 proposal that does not have the binational couple provision in that bill. Let it be brought up and then see how the cards will fall when there's an amendment to the Gang of 8 bill, if it reflects their principles, where there's an up or down vote on a binational couples provision. And then there are some who will argue, no, it should be like what Obama proposes. The binational couples provision should be an original bill that is brought forth to the U.S. Senate floor. So it really is a issue, a very, it's going to be a contested issue within the field that people are going to have to sort out. I don't know how it's going to be totally resolved.
I don't know the answer to the question specifically. As a political matter, I just wonder whether there will be some movement on the legal issue in terms of federal law about marriage equality. So the federal law, the Defense of Marriage Act, which is a federal law that doesn't recognize same-sex marriages, is at the Supreme Court. I don't think this particular angle is at issue, but I think that even if we aren't able to succeed in making, recognizing same-sex binational couples through immigration reform, there might be some movement as a legal issue through the other angle, through the federal law about marriage. I don't know, Bill, if you...
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And Henry's exactly right too. That it was a big moment about a month or so ago that a large group of evangelicals came out and supported immigration reform because they are important to the parts of the country that are anti-immigrant, and so they're telling those members of Congress it's okay to be in favor of immigration reform, but as Henry alluded to it, the evangelicals will not support same-sex marriage, okay? And so, but if, now we're trying not to talk too much law, okay? If the Supreme Court strikes down DOMA so that it's actually unconstitutional to not recognize same-sex marriage, then, and Congress does nothing, then it's possible we have a good case that same-sex binational couples should be recognized under the immigration laws. We have a very good case. But if Congress does something affirmatively bad and says that marriage in the immigration law has to be heterosexual, then the question will be, and Cecilia's a litigator on this panel, and a constitutional law expert, the question will be, can Congress pass a discriminatory law like that? And can I be sarcastic here? Can Congress pass a law that specifically excludes Chinese? Okay, that went to the Supreme Court in the 90s. And would the Supreme Court do that again with respect to marriage equality and say that Congress has plenary power to also enact an anti-gay statute in the immigration law? That's a hard constitutional question, actually.
I think this is an issue that I'm very optimistic about. I mean, even if you look at the Chief Counsel's office here in San Francisco, they're responsible for representing ICE. When you see a same-sex couple where a visa has expired, they're granting prosecutorial discretion pretty consistently for families of same-sex couples and not enforcing the laws, not deporting people. And if you look, if we talk about this not as a legal conversation, but in terms of a moral conversation, and you look at, the last 10, 15 years and how much national consciousness has changed, I'm just very optimistic that we are going to see a day when same-sex couples can petition each other. I think that's going to happen. It's just a situation where the law is behind the moral norms of the country, and I think it's just going to be a matter of time before that changes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that eventually, and what Francisco's alluding to is very important. It didn't get much publicity. Just the way that Napolitano and the president announced this deferred action program for Dreamers in June, I guess that was when the announcement came. Shortly thereafter, the president made another announcement that said that parties to a same-sex marriage should also not be deported. They should also be granted prosecutorial discretion. So there was actually two big announcements.
So this may be shifting gears a lot, but a couple of you had alluded to issues that the Supreme Court has been taking up. And for folks in the audience who are maybe just hearing about immigration law just through the news, they may have seen the trend in the last 5 to 10 years of a lot of state and local governments taking up immigration. The Supreme Court has had to litigate the constitutionality of that. Cecillia is really in the heart of that battle. And so we did want to talk a little bit about that for the audience. So first, just a little bit of background, and you all should feel free to add, but I think the understanding is that as the federal government has grappled with how to, quote, solve our immigration problem, you see state and local governments trying to solve it on their own. So they're passing policies that are either, pro-immigrant policies, such as San Francisco Sanctuary City policy, or you have Arizona's SB 1070, Alabama's HB 56, very anti-immigrant policies that include racial profiling, they're for civil rights violations. So I did want to just open that up for folks to comment. Maybe Cecillia, you can just add about the work that you've been doing to battle those policies at the state and local level. And then also if you want to talk about how reform at the federal level may start impacting those lawsuits on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, and by the way, our work on this area is funded by Henry, so Henry is also responsible in part. I think that to make a long story short, we're coming towards the end, I hope, of about a 5 or 6 year cycle of very vicious anti-immigrant laws at the state and local level. So Bill can tell us about the history of this, but in our country what we see is that there are periods in which state and local governments try to get into the business of doing immigration enforcement. Here in California, we saw this with Proposition 187 back in, when was it? 94. And starting in about 2005 and 6, a pretty small group of anti-immigrant, anti-Latino activists started really making an effort to pump out these kinds of anti-immigrant laws again. And that really peaked in 2010 when Arizona passed its state law, anti-immigrant law, SB 1070. And then the following year, we saw 5 other states pass similar laws, including Alabama, which passed the worst of these laws of all. Now, how those state anti-immigrant laws relate to what's happening on the federal level now is very interesting. And what we've seen recently is coming out of 2010 and 2011, we were really bracing for this year, 2013, being another year where anti-immigrant state legislators are trying to do this again. The good news is that hasn't really happened, right? We have a handful of states, Mississippi, Virginia, Texas, these states, and Kansas. These states have, again, talked about passing anti-immigrant laws, but we haven't seen that really strong anti-immigrant push all across the country that we saw in 2011. And I think there are a few reasons for that. One is the November election, which we've already talked about tonight. Everyone saw that if you're a politician in the United States and you know which side your bread is buttered on, you had better not take anti-immigrant positions because you will lose the Latino vote primarily, and also the Asian American vote, which came out in favor of Obama, people think, because of immigration policy. The second reason why I think we've seen a slowdown on the state anti-immigrant laws is because last year the Supreme Court did strike down 3 out of 4 provisions of the Arizona law, which were at the Supreme Court. So basically what the Supreme Court said is, you can't criminalize, states cannot criminalize immigration-related activities. They had a much more confusing answer about whether police officers on the state and local level can notify the federal government that they've, for example, stopped someone that they think is an undocumented immigrant. But that's number 2. Three red lights out of 4 from the Supreme Court on state anti-immigrant laws. And then the third category, or the third reason why I think we've seen the slowdown on state anti-immigrant laws, is because of the prospect of federal reform. So what we've seen is, states like Arizona, Governor Brewer of Arizona, when they passed laws like SB 1070, were saying, we need to step in and do something about this immigration problem because the federal government's not doing anything. Well, now there's the prospect that the federal government is doing something. So the combination of those 3 things, I think, has led to a wait-and-see attitude. Now, what's really going to be interesting is whether or not federal legislative reform passes. That's going to have an impact again on the state level. And that's a much longer story, so I'll just stop.
Well, I think Cecillia and her colleagues in the public interest law field, they've done a superb job in challenging all these state-level anti-immigrant laws. But if you're an immigrant living in Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Utah, and Idaho, notwithstanding the Supreme Court decision, there remains a lot of fear because the court did not strike down the anti-racial profiling provision. So cops in those states can stop someone for whatever reason, and in the time that they do whatever check, they can also ask about immigration status. So there remains great fear within these communities about the law. And of course, many community groups are working with community members to document these abuses that may be occurring. So there is a hotline that, a matter of fact, there's a hotline that we support in Arizona, Respecto. They do an outstanding job of taking in calls, and many of those calls actually, Lydia Guzman, she works with Cecillia, provides a lot of information, real cases. There's Southern Poverty Law Center, housed the hotline in Alabama, so on and so forth. But we have to understand that in these states where these anti-immigrant laws have been adopted, Alabama, South Carolina, the foreign-born population is less than 5%. There's not what you call a huge critical mass of immigrants where they can find comfort among themselves. And that's why it's so critical in those states and in others that there be a great effort to organize the community and to really teach people what are their rights. So the National Day Labor Organizing Network and other allies, they've really done an excellent job of immigrant rights training with what they call neighborhood defense or barrio defense committees, where immigrants will lead themselves in advocating for their rights or protecting themselves when they're arrested. So in 2011, when HB 56 was adopted in Alabama, there was literally no viable immigrant-led group in the state of Alabama. But because of support, today there are now 22 immigrant-led groups in that state that are working in some shape or form with the Alabama Coalition for Immigrant Justice. So it can be done, but it really is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of, as Bill said, it takes a lot of sacrifice for these immigrants to step out, to organize themselves, and to challenge and make demands in a public forum. It's really not that easy, and it's something that we need to continue to encourage, advocacy groups such as CAA or civil rights groups and others, whether it's the Law Caucus or ACLU, to continue to work with immigrant community members in different aspects. Because even if there's legalization, there will always be enforcement.
So I just want to take a step back real quick. For folks in the audience who may not be familiar with the exact provisions of SB 1070 and Alabama's HB 56, if any of y'all can give any specific examples. I mean, I think we take for granted that we live in California. It's a very different experience here than in Arizona or in the South. So are there personal stories that you heard of the plaintiffs in those states? What is the daily impact for immigrants in those areas?
Yeah, I think, so to give a little bit of more direct impact, along the lines Henry was talking about, it's such a different experience for immigrants in Alabama compared to what we go through here in the Bay Area. We have some clients in Alabama who recently were arrested by a local police officer, a city police officer. They had gone, our clients are a husband and wife, the mother-in-law, the wife's mom, and the wife's cousin. They're all Latino. They went for a picnic in a public city park, and in the spot where they were picnicking, it just so happened there were all Latino park users there. There's a stream running through the park, and a lot of people were fishing, not including our clients who were just eating their picnic food. A local city police officer came along and decided he was going to demand identification from everybody there. And of course, our clients and some of the others, or undocumented immigrants, did not have an identification to produce. So then the officer decided to arrest everyone for fishing without a license under Alabama state law, hauled everyone off to jail. And then once people were in the jail, the people who were undocumented, this officer hoped would get swept into the deportation detention system. So I think, this is just to underscore what Henry said, which is throughout our country, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you're really at the mercy of any police officer who decides that he wants to become an immigration officer. And it's all about arresting you, getting you into jail, where you'll be screened for immigration purposes, and hoping that if you turn out to be a U.S. citizen or a lawfully present immigrant, that you won't bother doing anything about it, and that if you are someone who's deportable, that you'll get swept into the deportation system. So that's just one example. I mean, this is something that our people are confronting every day around the country.
Let me just add something on SB 1070. we're averaging about 400,000 deportations a year, and the only way this can happen is by getting local law enforcement to be complicit in that. But the thing about SB 1070 that is fascinating is that it's nationally very unpopular. And it's not only unpopular on Jon Stewart's show, it's becoming unpopular in the Republican Party. And one of the more fascinating articles I've read recently is an article about Grover Norquist, who is the architect of the pledge, no new taxes pledge, criticizing Chris Kobach, who is the architect of SB 1070, and talking about how anti-immigrants are negatively impacting the Republican Party. And so I think the work that is being done to highlight these injustices, because they are such tremendous injustices, and most people will look at them and say, my goodness, we have to change that. The work that's being done to highlight these injustices is actually coming to fruition, and we are now in a time, in a climate where immigration reform is really possible. And so thanks to the amazing work also of the legal work that the ACLU Immigrant IRP has been doing. So, I think we can look at SB 1070 as an example, and this stuff is happening every day. 1,000 people are being deported, but at the same time, that you're seeing a national consciousness raising around the issue.
Thank you. So I know that we want to save some time for Q&A, but there's just so much that we want to cover. So we just want to cover one last topic, because we know that this is going to come up in immigration reform, and I think a few of you mentioned it earlier on, but the issue of employee verification. This has been included in both the White House proposal and the Senate proposal, but we've talked about the 11 million undocumented folks who are here. Many of them, most of them are working without work authorization. And in addition, immigration reform needs to address not only the 11 million here, but also what we're calling future flow, the continuous flow of immigrants that will come beyond that 11 million, beyond immigration. So I guess I would like to just open it up to talk about, both of the proposals that we've seen from the White House and Senate have included mandatory employee verification. And for the audience who may not be familiar, if someone can just explain what are some of the dangers with these employee verification programs, and we'll just leave it at that for the panelists.
Well, I'll leave it to the ACLU person to talk about the privacy complaints. But so before 1986, it was okay if you hired an undocumented worker. There was no law against hiring an undocumented employee before 1986, and so 1986 was the first time that Congress enacted what's called employer sanctions, and that was the beginning of the end, I think, for our communities. Employer sanctions is what licensed George Bush's administration to do the kinds of raids that were always on television, where it was gun-wielding raids, where people were scared out of towns, and people were arrested in small towns in Iowa and in Colorado and put into detention centers. The license to do that was employer sanctions. There's this belief that if you punish the employers, then and you dry up the work, that people will not come here to work, which is not true. People will come here if they have to feed their families. They will come here and work. It's given license to the Obama administration to engage in what's called silent raids. So Obama is not, and Napolitano are not doing too many of the gun-wielding raids, although they've done a handful. It's what's called silent raids, where they send letters of warning to employers to say, hey, we've got a list of 20 employees there that their Social Security cards don't look right. Fire them or get fined. And so they fire the individuals who are working. So at the end, people still lose their work, okay? They still lose their job. The losers in all this are our families who are trying to work, and it gets disrupted, okay? And so the fact that both the Obama administration and the Senate just continues this belief that we got to make it hard on employers. And I'll be honest with you, even some of our friends in the immigrant rights community adopt this line of, yeah, why aren't we punishing the employers? We're only punishing the employees. Well, to me, the punishment that should be visited upon employers We don't need employer sanctions. We just need to enforce health and safety laws, minimum wage laws, and other employment laws. That's what should be enforced, not, and so and the other thing they need, our workers, our families need, is not only the ability to organize under the National Labor Relations Act, which there's loosely a recognition of that, but the full power of the National Relations Act, to be able to sue for back wages if you've been wrong, be able to organize, to make the workplace better and safer for the workers. That's what we need, not punishing the employees by Obama or Bush losing your work.
So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I was a union organizer for 8 years before I became a lawyer, and then I was a labor attorney and worked directly with immigrant workers on Social Security no-match issues. And so I don't think there's anything more unjust or antithetical to principles of justice to divide workers on the basis of immigration status, and I agree with everything in principle and with what Bill just said. However, I think that we need to take a hard look as advocates as to what we can achieve and what we can't achieve with immigration reform, and whether we are willing to actively oppose a bill for reform if it contains provisions like E-Verify, mandatory E-Verify. E-Verify and immigration enforcement in the workplace is happening. It's been happening over the last 5 years. I'm representing workers that were raided at the El Balazo Taqueria 5 years ago and placed in deportation proceedings under the guise of a federal enforcement action where they were going after the employer, when in reality the workers were the ones that suffered. But we have a major, major problem in this country in that 11 million people are here without status and are at the risk of deportation every day when they go to and from work. Eliminating employer sanctions from 1986 is a very, very difficult lift. Okay, I absolutely think we should not criminalize employment in this country. Yet, if we look at what is possible right now, I think as advocates we have to look at each other and say, well, E-Verify is a very problematic program, but are there ways we can change E-Verify where there wouldn't be mandatory termination of the employee as a result of a tentative non-confirmation that you receive through the E-Verify program? Are there ways we can protect worker rights and advocates on the worker rights angle to make sure that an undocumented worker can be reinstated to work and with full back pay if they're terminated because of their status? So I think that we as advocates really have to ask the hard questions because the state of emergency of 11 million undocumented people has to be addressed.
Okay, well, I mean, if nobody else has anything else to add, I just wanted to ask one closing question for everyone. I mean, we talked a lot of issues today. We talked about enforcement, we talked about same-sex couples, we talked about workers' rights, pathway to citizenship, dreamers issues. So if you all were to each choose 2 issues in immigration reform that you would prioritize, what would they be? And also, if you can maybe, to other advocates, what are some things that we should watch out for as reform develops?
You only get 2.
I'll start, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. So I think having the broadest possible path to citizenship has got to be at the top of everybody's agenda. For all the criticisms we have for the Gang of 8 proposal and the White House proposal, and God knows what the House bipartisan committee will come up with, I mean, let's stop and appreciate for a minute how remarkable it is that we're sitting here with the Republicans saying with Democrats, we need to find a way to give people a path to citizenship. So it's amazing. Let's let that sink in and fight for that. The second thing, and this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit, is to say it might be a 2 for 1 or several for 1. I think I would really prioritize any opportunities we have to restore the notion that we have individualized justice in our immigration system, right? So that immigration judges are not required to lock people up when they're fighting their deportation cases and are required to boot people out of the United States regardless of their individual circumstances. I think that we went we have an extreme, unjust and inhumane immigration system that's become our new normal since 1996. And whether we're playing defense in trying to prevent more of that kind of stuff happening in this round of immigration reform, or we're playing offense and saying we need to fix some of these things, I think that's got to be a priority.
I'll follow up on that. I couldn't agree more, and she stole what I was going to say. No,
We can
actually,
share.
yeah.
Same here.
Well, one issue that I'm so deeply passionate about is the right of children and U.S. citizen children, or just children, to be with their parents. And I think that's something in any reform package. Cecillia talked brilliantly about the individualized justice, but I think children, we have to be conscious of the plight of children. And then secondly, immigration detention. The detention system is so out of control. 32,000 people every day are in some form of immigration detention, in some cases indefinite. There's something called a provision of mandatory detention, so if you have 2 crimes of moral turpitude, you are committed to detention for the duration of your immigration proceedings, which could last for years. And so I think, and there's a profit motive around building more detention centers, private detention centers. There must be detention reform. I don't know if we're going to see that in this bill, but that's something I'd love to fight for.
Yeah, I'm just repeating Cecillia. The allowing immigration judges to give people a second chance that had one mistake or 2 mistakes, it's not automatic. Prior to 1996, they didn't automatically grant it. It just gave the judge a chance to consider whether or not the person was deserving of a second chance, and that was eliminated in 1996. And so, and legalization, of course, and now I'm cheating. And clearing the family backlogs, and not having to pay the price of giving up on family immigration categories. That's what we wish.
Yeah, I think that we need to reform and update our immigration system so across the board that there are more visas in the many different categories. Because the economists and other folks who look at the aging of American society, the kind of workforce that we need, there is no doubt that immigration is central to the economic viability of our country. So we can never have enough immigrants who can contribute to our country. Secondly, I know this is really idealistic, but we really need to question the huge amount of money that we're spending on enforcement. Why are we jailing people who they don't want to go back to their home country? They want to stay here in the United States. They want to do something productive. Okay, if they violated some immigration provision or they did not respond to a notice, and therefore they didn't appear, and therefore they're deportable or they're put in deportation. I mean, it's insane. So, we've always talked about the military-industrial complex during the 60s. Well, now we need to talk about the enforcement complex because there are corporations and individuals who are making money off of detaining and deporting people. It's not by chance that the private prison industry are behind all these laws that Cecillia and the National Immigration Law Center, MALDEF, Latino Justice, Southern Poverty Law Center, they're all litigating against these state laws that are actually been promoted and lobbied for by these corporate interests. So in this day and age where we want to be fiscally responsible and hold down the federal budget, I, for the life of me, don't understand why we're spending the kind of money that we are on enforcement. It does not make economic sense, and certainly it's a human tragedy for the hundreds of thousands of families that have been broken up and separated in the past and maybe in days to come.
Thank you. So we do want to offer some time to get some questions from the audience. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. We have Benita and Jenny going around with microphones, so if you could just raise your hand. And if you'd like to ask a question in Chinese, please feel free to do so, and then Michelle up here will translate it for our panelists to answer.
So, hi. I have a couple, but I'll start with one and leave for other people to ask questions. You guys mentioned, what about the groups that will be left behind after immigration reform? And one of you touched on the 10-year bar. So what happens to those parents out there who did somehow ended up leaving the country due to a deportation while at work, and they had to return to support us, their children, and give us an education? What are the possibilities for those parents?
I remember I had a conversation with an advocate recently about immigration reform, and my first thought was we need to have rights for deportees because there are millions, and there are so many children who've lost their parents who are still not with their parents. And I think for us to be realistic about providing those rights, we need to take a lesson from the dreamers and to organize and to tell the stories. And so I think if children of people who've been deported come forward and talk about their stories, I think, and share their stories with representatives, and that becomes a big issue, then we may have a more realistic chance. I don't think right now anything is being discussed around that, but I think that it's a question of organizing and to what extent we can build momentum.
Right. In the 1986 IRCA, if you had been deported within that period of time, you were ineligible. And so no doubt there will be something like that in the new proposal. But the Immigrant Justice Network, which is a group of deportation crim-im organizations across the country, one of their principles actually is to put a waiver of inadmissibility in the package, so that if somebody was in that situation, that there would be a discretionary waiver available to them. And so, it's a matter of advocacy, as Francisco said, with the people that are the policymakers.
Okay, I have a question. Since the election, we have two hot-button issues: immigration reform and gun control. And we find both Republicans and Democrats all jumping on the bandwagon supporting these two. But and tonight we hear a lot about all the horrible stories about people being mistreated in this country. And of course, the other group of people being mistreated are the 25,000 to 30,000 people who die in a handgun every year in America. So my question is, why is the human rights not an issue in both these debates?
Well, there are human rights groups that support, not civil rights groups, but there are groups, especially along the border community groups. When they talk about immigration enforcement and the impact of enforcement on their communities, they're talking about it from a human rights perspective. Unfortunately, the voice of border communities have not been fully heard in the immigration reform debate. And that's one of the things that we actually at For Freedom's Fund has worked on. Since 2008, For Freedom's Fund has really looked at the US-Mexico border in particular, and we have supported groups from San Diego all the way to Brownsville, Texas, so that they can do more organizing and advocacy. And many of these groups actually use the human rights frame Unfortunately, within the immigrant rights field, and this gets into politics of immigration reform, border advocates, their voices are not often heard. And hopefully, with this next round of the debate, their voices about the human rights abuses will be heard. I mean, we've actually funded ACLU New Mexico to set up a internet-based human rights documentation abuse system. And ACLU is working with ACLU New Mexico is working with border groups along the US-Mexico border on both the American side and the Mexican side to document these cases. And hopefully through this documentation, they will have greater data and have the wherewithal to really ask for policy change. And I agree with you, the human rights frame has not been used well enough, either by gun control advocates or immigrant rights advocates. I hate to agree with Wen Chi, but...
Are there any more questions from the audience? We have one up here.
I have a question.
We'll have a microphone for you.
Is that on? This question, I guess, is also for Henry because he talked more about guest workers. And I'm concerned about guest workers and how they lead to breakup of family. I mean, we saw that. Didn't think it was working. This one is. My question is about guest workers and how they lead to breakup of families. We saw it with the Bracero program. We certainly saw it in Chinatown when there was no immigration of wives. And again, it's not just the low wages. When you look at San Francisco's minimum wage, we have all the things they ought to have on a statewide and a national basis. But, I mean, we have all the protections. You don't have to be documented to complain about your labor rights in San Francisco, and you can get them. But the other big issue, I think, is the family, and I wanted to ask you what you think about that and the guest workers.
Well, I think advocates, like farm worker justice, which has been at the forefront of securing the passage of ag jobs for farm workers, and others that have followed guest worker programs and have documented how badly guest workers are abused by employers, they're very clear about arguing for a roadmap to citizenship for guest workers. They've made it very clear that if there's not a roadmap to citizenship or legal status, then a lot of bad things can happen. And so within that frame where they can apply for LPR or citizenship, that's where the family will in fact be protected. I'm not really an immigration law expert. There are so many, Francisco and Bill can talk more about it. There's so many aspects to immigration law that families really get tripped up very badly.
There actually is a guest worker program, right? It's called the H-2B program, and for agricultural workers, and it generates lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. I was just reading a complaint today, as a matter of fact, that was in a case for California Rural Legal Assistance, and it's about an H-2B person who's in the Central Valley who came over legally by this employer, and it's housing problems, no healthcare problems. It's just everything that you can imagine that sounded like the Bracero abuse, and it's happening right now. And so that's a real problem because both bills, or both proposals that we know of so far, have this guest worker element in it. And it does scare me I saw the same story that Francisco alluded to earlier. That the SEIU, the one I saw, SEIU and the National Chamber of Commerce are working together on a guest worker proposal, and it scares me.
I mean, one caveat here, and I'm not playing devil's advocate, but having seen so many people who came across looking for work but were unable to find a visa, for many people, the opportunity to come legally and work legally on a visa is a lot more preferable than coming over and trying to find work on the street corner. And so I think when we look at immigration reform, we have to keep that in mind, that there will be a flow. Economic, many people are here not out of desire, but out of necessity. And that, many people would have preferred to come here through a greater guest worker type program, notwithstanding the egregious abuses in the guest worker programs. But I think that's something that we should keep in mind as we move forward.
So we have just a few closing thoughts from Michelle in terms of next steps from CAA, things that you can do to stay plugged into our work, and then we'll also have Vin close out our entire program. But before we do, if everyone can just thank all of our panelists for their time.
So just really quickly, as we were doing the Q&A, everybody, heard all the paper shuffling. So we passed out a piece of paper, it's kind of like a CAA fact sheet. We just put out the principles or the priorities that as CAA we believe in that immigration reform should have. And it explains, some of the various points that, we talked about here as well. And then on the back, there's actually some ways for folks to get engaged. We really kind of saw this panel tonight as, the beginning of a conversation, or, to help you understand a little bit deeper about immigration issues. But, it's definitely the start, or it's definitely not the end. So we hope that, there's something on the back that you can get a little bit more information about. I don't know about anybody else here, but I personally have a lot more questions than probably what I started off with. So CAA and possibly some other partner CBOs, we're hoping to do community briefings that, maybe at a frequent time, maybe once a month. We do hope to hold meetings for the community and for the media to come and talk about various immigration reform issues and to get our questions answered.
Great. So we're going to wrap up soon, and maybe Jermaine can join me up here. But before we close it, maybe we can give another round of applause, this time not just to the panelists, but to our two moderators. Our panelists alluded to this, but immigration and immigrant rights is not a new issue for our community. It's one of the issues that defines who we are. And, we were very sad to lose a member of our community very recently, Maurice Chuck. And there was a beautiful memorial that was held in his memory. And, I don't know that a lot of people necessarily know Maurice, but Maurice led a personal struggle his entire life as an immigrant. He was targeted during the McCarthy era. He was targeted because he believed in immigrant rights, and he believed in freedom of expression. And during a time when it was highly unpopular, he talked about his views of China that were not consistent with what the popular political mainstream wanted to hear. He wrote many articles and also a trilogy of novels about his experience as a Chinese American. He was forced into detention. He was forced to testify against his family. But throughout his life, he really persevered. And I think, as we close this meeting, one of the things we can do to honor people like Maurice is not just to celebrate the life that they lived, but to actually take responsibility for the world we're going to create. And it's very easy for us to distance ourselves from, the Chinese Exclusion Acts of the past, or the anti-immigrant sentiments and the xenophobia of the past. But it's much harder for us to recognize that we live with these things today. And in the next 4, 5, 6 months, there's a real opportunity for this community to be heard. And at CA, we want to do that as much as possible, to to try and amplify the voices of those who believe in a more fair and just immigration policy. So thank you again for coming, and Jermaine is going to officially adjourn the meeting with her thoughts.
Thank you, Nancy. By the way, I almost forgot, if you haven't already, please wish Vin a happy 40th birthday. You're a kid. And I just wanted to repeat what Michelle said earlier. It's really important that we not just sit and listen, which is important, but we also need to get involved with this very important issue, especially since Congress is going to be acting on it most likely the first part of this year. And the sheet that we handed out to you, I think, has contact information on how to get involved, so I hope you will do that. And to close the business portion of our meeting, as Vince said earlier, we're going to have a meeting to explain the expansion of our work with CAA and our new organization, Asian Americans for Civil Rights and Equality. And you'll be receiving an announcement of that shortly if you are a paid member of CAA. So if you haven't already done so, you're welcome to sign up right after this meeting. Thank you very much for attending tonight, and I'll now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah.